In 1875, Wyoming Territory, a mail-order bride steps off the train, her face hidden behind a thick veil. She carries more than just her small carpet bag. She carries the weight of scars that have reshaped both her face and her future. The man who promised to marry her takes one look beneath the veil and walks away, leaving her stranded in a town of strangers. But fate has other plans. At the edge of an old wooden church, a quiet rancher notices her in the shadows. His gentle eyes hold no judgment, only kindness. His calloused hands have known their own kind of loss, and his heart remembers what it means to hope. What happens when two broken souls learn that imperfection can be its own kind of beautiful? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The first rays of dawn crept through the threadbare curtains of the boarding house, casting long shadows across Hannah Morgan's borrowed room. She traced her fingers along the crisp edges of the medical certificate on her lap, her constant companion. These past 2 years, Dr. Elizabeth Warner's precise handwriting detailed the extensive burn treatments at Massachusetts General Hospital, each word a reminder of the night that had divided her life into before and after. Hannah rose slowly from the narrow bed, careful not to wake the other boarders. In the dimness, she could almost pretend she was back in her father's bookshop in Boston, surrounded by the familiar scent of leather bindings and fresh ink. But the musty smell of coal smoke and prairie dust quickly dispelled that comfort. 2 years ago, she had been Hannah Morgan, daughter of William Morgan, respected bookkeeper and purveyor of fine literature. The shop's brass bell would chime as Boston's finest entered, seeking first editions and leather-bound classics. She remembered the weight of heavy volumes in her arms, the quiet conversations about Dickens and Austen, the gentle scratching of her father's pen in the accounting ledgers. Then came the night of the fire. She had stayed late to finish cataloguing a new shipment of books. The lamp's flame must have caught something, perhaps a stray piece of packing paper, or maybe it was the dusty curtains. She remembered the sudden rush of heat, the terrifying crack of timber, and then nothing but pain and darkness. When she awoke in the hospital, her father was there, aged a decade in a single night. The shop was gone, along with their home above it, and their savings went to her medical care. But the true cost was etched across the left side of her face, down her neck and along her shoulder, a map of scars that no amount of medical skill could completely erase. "You're still my beautiful girl," her father had whispered, his voice breaking. But she saw how others turned away, how former friends struggled to meet her eyes. Even her fiancé, Charles Wellington, with all his proclamations of undying love, found reason to travel abroad indefinitely for business opportunities. The advertisement in the Boston Herald had seemed like Providence. Seeking God-fearing woman for marriage. Must be practical, hard-working, and of good character. Town of Promise Creek, Wyoming Territory. Thomas Bennett's letters had been kind, speaking of his ranch and his dreams of building something meaningful in the West. He hadn't asked for a photograph, and she hadn't offered one. Now, standing before the clouded mirror in her boarding house. "Room?" Hannah adjusted her veil with practiced hands. Mrs. Peterson, the widow who ran the establishment, had taken her in last night after Thomas Bennett had looked beneath her veil and walked away without a word, leaving her standing alone on the train platform. "Just for a few days," Mrs. Peterson had said, her eyes kind but cautious. "Until you sort things out." Hannah's fingers found the rough paper of her return ticket, still nestled in her reticule. But return to what? Her father had passed 6 months ago, the shop long since sold to pay his debts. Boston held nothing for her now, except memories and pitying glances. The floorboards creaked beneath her feet as she made her way downstairs. The boarding house was stirring to life, the clatter of pots in the kitchen, murmured conversations behind closed doors, the scrape of boots on wooden stairs. Through the front window, she could see Promise Creek coming awake. Shopkeepers sweeping their boardwalks, a wagon loaded with milk cans rattling down the dusty street, morning light catching on the white-painted church steeple that rose above. The other buildings, like a finger pointing to heaven. Hannah touched the medical certificate in her pocket one last time before tucking it away. Dr. Warner had written not just of treatments and procedures, but of courage. Courage Hannah wasn't sure she possessed anymore. Yet something in the morning air of Promise Creek whispered of possibility. Perhaps here, where the sky stretched endless above the prairie and the wind carried the scent of sage and freedom, she might find a way to begin again. She straightened her spine, checked her veil, and stepped out into the morning light of her new world. Sunday morning arrived with the gentle tolling of church bells. Hannah lingered in the shadow of a cottonwood tree, watching Promise Creek's residents file into the whitewashed building in their Sunday best. Ladies in pressed calico dresses clutched prayer books to their chests, while men in cleaned boots and freshly trimmed mustaches guided their families up the wooden steps. She hadn't planned to come. 3 days of whispers and sidelong glances in town had taught her the weight of strangers' curiosity, but Mrs. Peterson had pressed a worn prayer book into her hands that morning, its pages soft with age and use. Sometimes, the widow had said, smoothing her grey hair beneath her bonnet, the Lord's house is the only place wide enough to hold our sorrows. Between the pages, pressed wildflowers still held their colour, purple prairie clover and yellow butterfly weed. Mrs. Peterson had gathered them decades ago, she'd explained, during her first summer in Wyoming territory. Each bloom marked a prayer, a hope, a moment when beauty had surprised her in the midst of hardship. Hannah waited until the last stragglers entered before slipping through the church doors. She chose a seat in the back corner where the morning light wouldn't catch her veil. The familiar scents of beeswax candles and pine wood polish stirred memories of Sunday mornings in Boston. Her father's bass voice strong in the hymns, her mother's hand warm in hers before the fever took her. Reverend Mills's sermon drifted over her like summer wind through prairie grass. Words of grace and second chances, of beauty rising from ashes. Hannah's fingers traced the edges of Mrs. Peterson's prayer book, finding comfort in its well-worn leather corners. She felt his presence before she saw him. A tall figure paused in the side aisle, then quietly took the seat across from her. Through her veil, she could make out broad shoulders beneath a clean work shirt, hands that spoke of honest labor, and eyes the color of prairie sky after rain. He didn't stare or try to catch a glimpse beneath her veil. Instead, he opened his own prayer book and followed along with the service, his deep voice joining the congregation's responses with quiet certainty. A young girl sat beside him, perhaps 12 or 13, her dark hair neatly braided and tied with blue ribbon. Every so often, she would glance at Hannah with frank curiosity, but without the pity or revulsion Hannah had grown too familiar with. When the final hymn ended and people began to file out, Hannah stayed in her seat, waiting for the crowd to thin. The man and girl rose, but instead of leaving, he turned toward her. His face was weathered by sun and wind, lined with both sorrow and kindness. "Miss," he said, his voice as gentle as his eyes, "I'm Daniel Crawford. This is my daughter, Sarah." He spoke without awkwardness or forced cheer, as if speaking to a woman in a veil was the most natural thing in the world. "We have a ranch about 3 miles east of town. We're looking for help with the house and kitchen, if you're interested." In honest work, Hannah's throat tightened. She had heard of Daniel Crawford. The widow Mrs. Peterson mentioned him as one of Promise Creek's most respected ranchers. His wife had passed 5 years ago, leaving him to raise their daughter alone. "I'm Hannah Morgan," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. I have experience keeping house, and I can cook." Sarah Crawford stepped forward, her eyes bright with hope. "Can you make apple pie?" "Ma used to make the best apple pie, but Pa burns everything he tries to bake." There was no artifice in her words, just simple truth, and perhaps a touch of longing. Daniel Crawford's laugh was rich and warm, though touched with something that might have been embarrassment. Sarah speaks truth about my cooking. The offer's open, Miss Morgan, if you'd like to consider it. We can pay fair wages, and there's a proper room of your own in the house. Hannah's fingers tightened around Mrs. Peterson's prayer book. Through the veil, she studied Daniel Crawford's face, looking for any sign of the curiosity or revulsion she'd come to expect. She found none, only patience and something that might have been understanding. "You should know," she said carefully, "about my appearance. I wouldn't want to frighten your daughter." Sarah made a sound that might have been a snort, quickly stifled by her father's gentle hand on her shoulder. "Miss Morgan," Daniel said, "in my experience, true frightfulness has little to do with appearance and everything to do with what's in a person's heart. You seem like someone who could bring some grace back into our home. The job's yours if you want it." Hannah felt something shift inside her chest, like a bird testing long unused wings. In the quiet of the emptying church, sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, painting the worn wooden pews with jeweled colors. The pressed flowers in Mrs. Peterson's prayer book seemed to whisper of hope and second chances. "Yes," she heard herself say. "Yes, I would like that very much." Daniel nodded, a small smile warming his features. "We'll send the wagon for you tomorrow morning if that suits. Sarah can show you around the house, help you get settled." Sarah beamed, practically bouncing on her toes. "I can show you where we keep the apple trees, too. They'll be ready for picking soon." As they left the church, Hannah held Mrs. Peterson's prayer book close. Through her veil, she watched Daniel and Sarah Crawford walk down the dusty street, their shadows long in the afternoon light. For the first time since stepping off the train, she felt something like peace settle over her shoulders, light as prairie wind and sweet as the promise of autumn apples. The Crawford ranch house rose from the prairie like a ship emerging from morning mist. Hannah sat beside Sarah in the wagon, her carpet bag clutched tight as Daniel guided the horses up the rutted drive. The house itself wasn't grand. 2 stories of weathered wood with green shutters and a wraparound porch, but something about it spoke of home. "Pa built it himself," Sarah said proudly, "with help from Grandpa Crawford before he passed. Every spring we whitewashed the kitchen, and last summer Pa finally fixed the squeaky step on the porch." She pointed to a cluster of rose bushes near the front door. "Those were Ma's. They bloom yellow like sunshine." Daniel's hands tightened slightly on the reins at the mention of his late wife, but his voice remained steady. "Martha had a way with growing things. Seemed like anything she touched turned to beauty." The wagon stopped before the porch, and Hannah felt her heart flutter beneath her high collar. This moment, stepping down, walking into a stranger's home, suddenly seemed monumental. But Daniel was already there, offering his hand with simple courtesy, helping her down, as if assisting veiled women was an everyday occurrence. Inside, the house held the slightly mysterious air of a place long inhabited by only a man and child. The furniture was solid and well made, but dust had settled in corners, and the curtains hung slightly askew. The kitchen showed signs of Daniel's bachelor cooking, a stack of unevenly washed plates, a scorched pot soaking in the sink, but it was the daguerreotype on the parlor wall that caught Hannah's eye. A woman with laughing eyes, and Sarah's dark hair smiled out from the silver surface, frozen in a moment of joy. She wore a simple dress, and her hand rested on a young Sarah's shoulder. The resemblance between mother and daughter was striking. "That's Ma," Sarah said softly, coming to stand beside Hannah. "Pa had it taken in town the summer before she got sick. She didn't like having her picture made, said she wasn't fancy enough, but Pa insisted, said he wanted to capture her smile." Daniel had moved to the fireplace, his back to them, but Hannah could see the tension in his shoulders. "Martha always thought too little of herself," he said quietly. "Never could convince her how beautiful she was, inside and out." Hannah's fingers moved unconsciously to her veil, and something of her gesture must have caught Daniel's attention. He turned, his eyes meeting hers through the gauzy barrier. "Miss Morgan," he said, "I know it's not my place, but in this house you'll find no judgment." Sarah and we've learned that life leaves its marks on all of us. Some are just more visible than others. The kindness in his voice nearly undid her. 2 years of hiding, of shrinking from mirrors and pitying glances, had built walls around her heart. But something in Daniel Crawford's quiet dignity, in Sarah's open acceptance, made those walls feel suddenly fragile. With trembling fingers, Hannah reached for her veil. Sarah's quick intake of breath was the only sound in the room as the gauzy material fell away. Hannah forced herself to stand straight, to meet their eyes, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. The scars traced their familiar pattern down the left side of her face, pulling slightly at the corner of her mouth, disappearing beneath her collar. In the Boston hospital, Dr. Warner had called her lucky. The burns had spared her eye, her hair had grown back, and with time the angry red had faded to silver pink. But lucky had felt like mockery when she saw her reflection, when she watched. People's eyes slide away from her face. Daniel studied her for a long moment, his expression unchanging. Then he nodded, as if confirming something to himself. "Thank you," he said simply, "for trusting us." Sarah stepped closer, her young face serious. "Does it hurt still?" "Sarah," Daniel warned, but Hannah shook her head. "It's all right," she said. "No, it doesn't hurt anymore, just tender sometimes when the weather changes." Sarah nodded sagely. "Like Pa's old break in his arm. He can tell when storm's coming better than our neighbor's weather vane." She tilted her head, studying Hannah's face with frank curiosity. "I think it looks like a map. Like those ones in Pa's books of ancient sailing ships, with all the fancy lines showing the way to treasure." A laugh burst from Hannah's throat, surprising her with its genuineness. "I've never thought of it that way." "Well, you should," Sarah declared. "Maps are important. They help you find your way home." She grabbed Hannah's hand. "Come on, I'll show you your room. Pa put in new curtains yesterday, blue ones like the sky." As Sarah pulled her toward the stairs, Hannah glanced back. At Daniel. He stood by the fireplace still, one hand resting on the mantel near Martha's picture. But he was smiling, a gentle curve of lips that reached his eyes and smoothed the worry lines from his brow. The room was small but sweet, with a narrow bed under a window that faced east. The promised blue curtains stirred in the prairie breeze, and a fresh quilt lay folded at the foot of the bed. On the simple wooden dresser stood a pitcher and bowl, painted with delicate wildflowers. "The washstand was Ma's," Sarah said, running her fingers along the painted blooms. "Pa said you should have it. Said every lady needs a proper place to get ready in the morning." Hannah touched the cool ceramic, traced the painted petals. Such a simple thing, this gift of Martha Crawford's washstand. But it spoke volumes about Daniel's character. His understanding that Hannah might need something beautiful in her private space, something that had belonged to a woman who had been loved. "Thank you," she whispered, and wasn't sure if she was thanking Sarah or Daniel, or perhaps Martha herself, this woman she would never know, but whose presence still filled the house with grace. "I'll let you get settled," Sarah said, suddenly shy. "Supper's at 6. Pa tries, but—" she wrinkled her nose. "Maybe you could help. If you're not too tired." Hannah smiled, and for the first time in years didn't think about how the scars pulled at her expression. "I'd like that very much." After Sarah left, Hannah stood at the window, watching the prairie grass wave like a golden sea. A hawk wheeled overhead, riding the thermals with effortless grace. Below, she could see Daniel in the barn doorway, his stance relaxed as he spoke with Sarah. The girl's laughter carried on the wind, bright and clear as a bell. Something shifted in Hannah's chest, a loosening of bands she hadn't known were there. Perhaps Sarah was right about maps and finding one's way home. Perhaps sometimes the path led through fire and pain to arrive at a place where scars could be seen as something other than tragedy, as proof of survival, as lines on a map leading to unexpected treasure. Dawn crept through Hannah's eastern window, painting her room in shades of pearl and gold. She woke to the sounds of ranch life, Roosters crowing, cattle lowing in the distant pasture, the soft thud of Daniel's boots on the porch as he headed. Aim for the barn. The morning air carried the promise of autumn, crisp and clean against her skin as she dressed for the day. In the kitchen, she found Martha Crawford's recipe book propped open on the counter, its pages worn soft with use and spotted with ancient cooking stains. Sarah had shyly presented it the night before, after a supper of Hannah's beef stew had earned enthusiastic praise from both Crawfords. Ma wrote all her special recipes in here, Sarah had explained, carefully turning the pages. She said, cooking's like love. You have to pay attention to the little details. Her finger traced her mother's flowing script. See here? She always wrote little notes. Add extra cinnamon to the apple pie when Daniel's had a hard day, and Sarah likes her biscuits with honey, even though she pretends she's too grown up for sweets. Now, in the quiet of early morning, Hannah studied those same pages. Martha's handwriting flowed across the paper, not just recipes, but stories of her family's life, notes about Daniel's favorite dishes after long days with the cattle, reminders about Sarah's allergies to strawberries, little drawings in the margins, flowers, birds, simple sketches of her daughter's growing face. Hannah's fingers trembled as she turned to the section on breakfast dishes. A recipe for buttermilk pancakes caught her eye, accompanied by a note, "The secret is letting the batter rest. Patience makes perfect." She gathered ingredients, moving carefully in the unfamiliar kitchen. Flour dusted her apron as she measured and mixed, following Martha's precise instructions. The kitchen slowly filled with morning light and the promise of good things to come. Sarah appeared just as Hannah was pouring the first pancake onto the griddle, her hair still in its night braid. "It smells like," her voice caught, "like when Ma used to make breakfast." Hannah turned from the stove, uncertain, but Sarah's face held only wonder, not sadness. The girl pulled out a chair, watching intently as Hannah worked. "Mya always said you could tell a lot about a person by how they move in a kitchen," Sarah offered. "She said cooking with love means paying attention to the quiet things." The griddle sizzled as Hannah flipped a perfectly golden pancake. "Your mother sounds like she was very wise." "She was." Sarah straightened the plates on the table, moving them just so. "Pa says I'm getting more like her every day, but sometimes I worry I'm forgetting things about her, like the exact sound of her laugh or the way she'd hum when she was kneading bread." Hannah slid the first stack of pancakes onto a plate, adding a pat of butter that melted into golden rivers. "Sometimes," she said carefully, "love leaves its mark on us in ways we can't see, like recipes in a book or habits we don't even know. We've learned." Daniel's heavy tread on the porch prevented Sarah's response. He entered with the morning cold, still clinging to his coat, then stopped short at the sight and smell of breakfast. "Miss Morgan," he said, removing his hat, "you didn't have to—" He broke off, something complicated crossing his features as he took in the familiar recipe book, the griddle, his daughter's bright face. "Hannah made Ma's pancakes," Sarah announced. "The special ones with buttermilk." Daniel's eyes met Hannah's across the kitchen, and she felt herself flush beneath her scars. "I hope you don't mind," she said softly. "Sarah showed me the recipe book, and I thought—" "No," he said quickly, his voice rough. "No, I don't mind at all." He hung his hat on its peg with careful precision. "It's been a long time since this kitchen felt—" He didn't finish the thought, but his smile said enough. They ate together in the morning light, passing butter and syrup, talking of the day. Ahead, Daniel had cattle to move to the north pasture. Sarah had reading to catch up on. She attended the town school when weather permitted but studied at home during busy seasons. Hannah would learn the rhythm of the household, the weekly tasks that kept a ranch running. "These are better than Pa's," Sarah declared around a mouthful of pancake. "His always come out like leather." Daniel's laugh filled the kitchen. "No argument there. I've many skills, but cooking isn't among them." He caught Hannah's eye again. "It's good to have someone in the kitchen who knows what they're doing." After breakfast, Sarah helped clear the dishes, while Daniel headed back to his work. Hannah stood at the sink, letting the morning sun warm her face through the window. In Boston, she had always worn her veil indoors, even alone. But here, somehow, it felt right to let the light touch her scars, to feel the air on her skin. She turned to find Sarah studying her, head tilted in that way she had. "What is it?" "Your scars look different in the sunlight," the girl said thoughtfully. "All silvery, like the frost on morning grass." She picked up Martha's recipe book, holding it carefully. "Do you want to learn Ma's bread recipe next? She always said bread's the heart of a home." Hannah accepted the book, running her fingers over its worn cover. "I'd like that very much." As she read through Martha's careful instructions, noting the love tucked between measurements and methods, Hannah felt something settle in her chest. Here in this sun-warmed kitchen, with Sarah's chatter and the distant sound of Daniel working with his cattle, she could almost believe in new beginnings. Martha Crawford's recipe book had survived its author, carrying her love forward in cups of flour and pinches of salt, in careful notes and remembered sweetness. Perhaps that's what healing looked like, not the erasure of scars, but the slow building of something new around them, something made of morning light and shared meals, and the quiet magic of a family's recipes passed down with love. The leather work gloves felt strange in Hannah's hands. They were men's gloves, worn soft with use, the fingers too long for her. Daniel had brought them to her that morning, holding them out like an offering. "They were Martha's," he'd said quietly. "She insisted on having her own pair, said borrowed gloves never fit right in the sole." His weathered hands had smoothed the leather. "Might be too big, but they'll protect your hands better than nothing." Now Hannah stood at the corral fence, watching Daniel gentle a young mare. The October sun hung low in the morning sky, casting long shadows across the packed earth. She'd finished the morning's housework early, and something had drawn her out here, away from the safety of the kitchen. Daniel moved with quiet confidence, his voice a low murmur as he worked with the horse. The mare's coat gleamed copper in the sunlight, her ears flicking back and forth as she evaluated this human who asked for her trust. "You have to let them come to you," Daniel explained, not looking away from the horse. "Can't force trust. It's got to grow natural-like, same as anything worth having." Hannah touched the scars at her neck, understanding more than just horse training in his words. 3 weeks had passed since she'd first removed her veil in the Crawfords' parlor. Each day, it became a little easier to face the mirror, to meet. "He's in town," when she rode with Daniel and Sarah to Sunday services. "Would you like to learn?" Daniel asked, breaking into her thoughts. "Sarah's got her schoolwork, and I could use the help if you're willing." Hannah gripped the fence, uncertain. "I've never... In Boston, we didn't..." "Boston's a long way from here." Daniel's voice held no judgment, only quiet invitation. "Out. Here, everyone learns new things. Question is, are you willing to try?" The mare nickered softly, pushing her velvet nose against Daniel's shoulder. Such trust, freely given. Hannah thought of Martha's gloves, waiting to be filled with new purpose. "Yes," she said, "I'd like to learn." Daniel's smile warmed his eyes. "Come on in then, slow and easy." Hannah climbed through the fence rails, Martha's gloves protecting her palms from the rough wood. The packed earth felt solid beneath her boots. As she approached, Daniel held out his hand, and she took it, letting him guide her closer to the mare. "Her name's Dawn," he said softly. "Like the morning light on the prairie. Hold your hand out, palm up. Let her choose to come to you." Hannah stood still, arm extended, barely breathing. Dawn's ears swiveled forward with interest. The mare stepped closer, her breath warm against Hannah's palm. Then, gentle as a prayer, she pressed her soft muzzle into Hannah's hand. "Well done," Daniel murmured. "She sees you mean no harm." "How can she be sure?" Hannah whispered, entranced by the trust. In the mare's dark eyes, "How can she know?" "Animals see true," Daniel said. "They don't care about the surface of things. It's what's beneath that matters to them." Hannah stroked Dawn's neck, feeling the powerful muscles beneath smooth hide. The mare leaned into her touch, and something tight in Hannah's chest began to loosen. Over the next hours, Daniel taught her the basics of horse care, how to brush Dawn's coat until it gleamed, how to check her hooves for stones, how to lead her with gentle confidence. Hannah's arms ached from new work, but it was a good ache, honest as sunshine. They broke for lunch, sitting on the corral fence with bread and cheese Sarah had brought out. The girl had taken one look at Hannah working with Dawn and declared, "It's better than arithmetic anyway." "You're a natural," Daniel said, passing Hannah a canteen of water. "Dawn doesn't take to just anyone." "She's special," Hannah agreed, watching the mare graze nearby. "I never knew horses could be so gentle." Given the chance to be themselves, most creatures are gentler than we expect. Daniel's voice held a weight of meaning that made Hannah's heart flutter. We all carry marks of one kind or another. The trick is finding people who see past them to who we really are. The autumn wind played with Hannah's hair, cooling the sweat on her neck. She was aware of Daniel beside her, of the solid warmth of his presence. In Martha's gloves, her hands felt strong, capable of new things. "Sarah goes back to school tomorrow," Daniel said after a while. "Weather's holding fair. I could use help with the afternoon rides, checking fences and such. If you're interested in learning more." Hannah looked down at her gloved hands, then out at the prairie, stretching golden to the horizon. In Boston, she had hidden herself away, letting her scars define her world. But here, under the vast Wyoming sky, she felt something new taking root, something that tasted like possibility. "I'd like that," she said softly. "Pa!" Sarah's voice carried from the house. "Hannah! Soup's getting cold." They turned to see Sarah on the porch, hands on her hips in a gesture so like her mother's portrait that Daniel's breath caught audibly. "Coming, boss," he called back, and Hannah heard the smile in his voice. He jumped down from the fence, then turned to offer his hand. "Miss Morgan." Hannah took his hand, letting him help her down. Their fingers lingered together a moment longer than necessary, and she felt the warmth of that touch all the way to her bones. "Thank you," she said, "for teaching me. Thank you for being willing to learn." His eyes held hers, steady and kind. Sometimes the hardest part of any journey is just being willing to take that first step. They walked back to the house together, Dawn's soft nickering following them across the yard. Hannah flexed her fingers in Martha's gloves, feeling how they had already begun to shape themselves to her hands. Sometimes, she thought, healing came in unexpected ways, through trust freely given, through work that made you stronger, through gloves passed from one woman's hands to another, carrying wisdom and possibility in their well-worn leather. The weather-worn Bible lay open on the Crawfords' kitchen table, its family pages telling stories in faded ink and careful script. Hannah traced the entries with gentle fingers while wind rattled the windows, each gust carrying the promise of the coming storm. "Storm's going to be a bad one," Daniel had announced at breakfast, rubbing his once-broken arm. "Barometer's falling fast, and the cattle are restless. We'll need to secure everything before it hits." Now, waiting for Daniel and Sarah to return from the barn, Hannah studied the Bible's family records. Generations of Crawfords had marked their lives in these pages: births, deaths, marriages. Martha's death was recorded in Daniel's strong hand, the ink slightly smudged as if by a fallen tear. Below that, in Sarah's careful childhood writing, "Mama went to heaven today. The angels needed her more than we did." The wind rose again, and Hannah closed the Bible carefully. There was work to be done. She had already filled every available container with water, laid in extra wood by the stove, and made sure the oil lamps were full. Now she moved through the house, checking windows, drawing curtains against the darkening sky. She found Sarah's new coat, outgrown since last winter, and began taking up the hem. The stitches were tiny and even, a habit learned in her father's shop, where precision mattered. Outside, she could hear Daniel and Sarah's voices carried on the wind as they worked to secure the barn doors. The first fat drops of rain spattered against the windows, just as father and daughter burst through the kitchen door, bringing with them the sharp scent of approaching storm. "Everything's battened down tight," Daniel reported, helping Sarah out of her wet coat. "Horses are settled. Cattle are in the sheltered pasture. Now we just wait it out." He looked at Hannah, something warming his eyes. "You've been busy too, I see." Hannah nodded toward her preparations. "Water's stored, lamps are filled. I've got stew simmering and bread baking." Sarah's coat is almost a tremendous crack of thunder cut her off, making them all jump. Sarah pressed close to her father's side, and Hannah saw the girl's face go pale. "Sarah's never been fond of storms," Daniel explained softly. Then to his daughter, "Why don't you fetch that Bible there? We could use some reading to pass the time." But Sarah shook her head, pulling away. "I'll get Ma's memory book instead. The one with all the pressed flowers. It always makes me feel better during storms." When she had gone upstairs, Daniel's shoulders slumped slightly. Martha used to sing to her during storms, had a voice like an angel, soft and sweet. "Me, I can't carry a tune in a bucket." Hannah's heart ached at the lost note in his voice. "Sometimes," she said carefully, "it's not the song itself that matters, but the love behind it." Their eyes met across the kitchen, and something electric passed between them, deeper than words. Then Sarah's footsteps on the stairs broke the moment, and they turned to watch her return with a leather-bound book clutched to her chest. The storm struck in earnest then, rain hammering the roof like 1,000 drumming fingers. They gathered close to the stove's warmth, Sarah between them on the old sofa, the memory book open on her lap. Each page held carefully pressed flowers, with Martha's neat writing noting when and where each bloom was found. "This one's from the day Pa asked her to marry him," Sarah said, pointing to a pressed wild rose. "And these violets, she picked them the day I was born." Her finger traced the faded petals. She said, "Flowers tell stories, if you know how to listen." Thunder rolled again, closer now, and Sarah pressed against Hannah's side. Without thinking, Hannah began to hum softly, an old hymn her mother had sung, one about peace in the midst of storms. Sarah's tension slowly eased, her head coming to rest against Hannah's shoulder. Daniel watched them, his face soft in the lamplight. Outside, the storm raged, but in here, something precious and fragile was taking shape, delicate as pressed flowers between pages. They passed the evening that way, sharing stories as the storm spent its fury. Sarah spoke of memories of her mother, things Hannah had never known, how Martha had loved to dance in summer rain, how she'd known the name of every wild thing that grew on the prairie, how she'd taught Sarah to braid her hair by practicing on corn silk. When Sarah finally dozed off, her head still on Hannah's shoulder, Daniel carefully lifted her into his arms. "I'll take her up to bed," he whispered. Hannah nodded, gathering the scattered books. The storm was beginning to ease, the thunder now distant growls. When Daniel returned, he found her by the window, watching lightning illuminate the prairie in brief, brilliant flashes. "Thank you," he said quietly, coming to stand beside her, "for everything today, the preparations, the mending, the way you were with Sarah. She's easy to love," Hannah replied softly, then felt herself flush at the word. But Daniel's face showed only understanding. "Yes," he agreed. "Like her mother that way." He was silent for a moment. Then, "Martha would have liked you, I think. You have the same kind of strength in you, the quiet kind that holds things together when storms come." Hannah touched her scars unconsciously, and Daniel's hand moved as if to catch hers, then stopped. The air between them felt charged, like the atmosphere before lightning strikes. "I should check the barn one more time," he said finally, his voice rough. "Make sure everything's still secure." "I'll go with you," Hannah found herself saying. "2 sets of eyes are better than one." They took the lantern and Martha's old oilskin coat, which Hannah now wore when working outside. The rain had softened to a gentle patter, and the wind had died to whispers. In the barn, the horses nickered quiet greetings. Dawn pressed her soft nose against Hannah's shoulder in greeting. As they checked stalls and feed bins, Hannah was acutely aware of Daniel's presence, of how naturally they moved together in the lantern's glow. When had this man and his daughter become so essential to her world? When had this weathered barn, this storm-washed prairie, become more home than all the familiar streets of Boston? The Bible's family pages flashed in her memory, generations of Crawfords marking their passages through life. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine her own name there, written in Daniel's strong hand. Not yet, perhaps not soon, but someday, when the time was right, when healing had done its perfect work. For now it was enough to stand beside him in the quiet aftermath of storm, listening to rain on the roof and horses breathing in the dark, feeling the future unfold, like flowers pressed between pages, holding all their stories safe. The torn marriage contract lay on Mrs. Peterson's parlor table, its clean rip down the middle, as stark as the day Thomas Bennett had walked away from Hannah at the train station. She hadn't expected to see it again, hadn't known Mrs. Peterson, had saved it from the trash where Thomas had thrown it. But here it was, 6 weeks later, as damning as a judge's gavel. "He's back in town," Mrs. Peterson said quietly, pouring tea into delicate cups that had survived the journey from Virginia 30 years ago. "Arrived on yesterday's train. He's been asking questions." Hannah's hands trembled slightly as she lifted her cup. The morning had started so normally. A trip into Promise Creek with Daniel and Sarah for supplies, a list of household needs in her pocket. They had separated at the general store, Daniel taking Sarah to the cobbler's for new school boots, while Hannah visited Mrs. Peterson. "What kind of questions?" Hannah asked, though she already knew. "About your arrangement with the Crawfords." Mrs. Peterson's grey eyes were kind but worried. "About property rights and marriage contracts. He's been speaking with Judge Wilson." The tea suddenly tasted bitter in Hannah's mouth. Outside, Promise Creek's main street bustled with morning activity. Through the lace curtains, she could see women in practical calico dresses hurrying about their errands, men loading wagons at the feed store, children playing marbles in the dust. "I don't understand," Hannah said. "He took one look at me and walked away. The contract was never formally dissolved," Mrs. Peterson finished gently. "And Thomas Bennett, for all his fine manners, has always had an eye for opportunity. The Crawford Ranch is prospering, and you've become—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "People have noticed how well you fit there, how the place has come alive again, how Daniel looks at you." Heat crept up Hannah's neck, warming her scars. "Daniel has been kind, nothing more." Mrs. Peterson's smile was sad and wise. "Kindness is where love often begins, my dear." The shop bell across the street chimed, and Hannah's heart stopped. Thomas Bennett stepped onto the boardwalk, every bit as handsome as his letters had promised. His suit was Eastern cut, his boots city polished. He turned, as if sensing her gaze, and their eyes met through the window. Hannah stood so quickly her teacup rattled. "I should go. Daniel and Sarah will be Miss Morgan." Thomas's voice carried through the open door he filled, smooth as cream and twice as rich. He stepped into Mrs. Peterson's parlor, hat in hand, looking for all the world like a gentleman making a social call. "Mr. Bennett." Hannah was proud of how steady her voice remained. "I believe we concluded our business 6 weeks ago." "Did we?" He smiled, and Hannah remembered how that smile had once seemed charming in his daguerreotype. Now it merely seemed practiced. "I've been thinking about our hasty parting. Perhaps I acted rashly." Rashly. The word tasted like ashes. "You looked beneath my veil and walked away without a word. You left me standing alone on a train platform in a strange town." "I was shocked," he admitted easily. "Unprepared. But I've had time to reconsider. After all, a contract is a contract." "A contract you threw away." Mrs. Peterson's voice could have frozen August wheat. Thomas waved a dismissive hand. "A moment of weakness, one I'm prepared to remedy." He turned to Hannah, his expression carefully arranged into something like contrition. "I've spoken with Judge Wilson. The contract remains valid, and I'm prepared to honor it now." The parlor door creaked, and Hannah's heart leaped as Daniel stepped in, his face thunderous. Sarah stood behind him, her eyes wide. "Everything all right here?" Daniel's voice was quiet, but Hannah heard the steel beneath it. Thomas turned, assessing. "Crawford, this is a private matter between myself and Miss Morgan." "Nothing involving Hannah is private from us," Sarah declared, slipping past her father to stand beside Hannah. The girl's small hand found Hannah's and squeezed. Thomas's smile thinned. Such loyalty. "Tell me, Crawford, do you always let your housekeeper inspire such devotion in your daughter?" Daniel took one step forward. Just one, but something in his stance made Thomas step back. "Choose your next words carefully, Bennett," Daniel said softly. "Very carefully." Hannah found her voice. "The contract was voided the moment you walked away, Mr. Bennett. We both know you're not here about honor or obligation." Her fingers touched her scars, but for the first time, she felt no shame in them. "You're here because you've heard the Crawford Ranch is profitable, because you think I might be useful after all." "My dear," Thomas began, but Hannah cut him off. "I am not your dear. I am not your anything. I was alone on that platform, but I'm not alone now." She straightened her spine, feeling Sarah's hand in hers, sensing Daniel's solid presence behind her. "Whatever scheme you're planning, whatever legal tricks you think you've found, save your breath. I'd rather live scarred and free than beautiful and bound to a man who sees only profit in marriage." The parlor fell silent. Even the street outside seemed to hold its breath. Thomas looked from Hannah to Daniel, calculating odds Hannah could almost see turning in his head. Finally, he settled his hat carefully on his head. "We'll see what the judge has to say about that." He turned to go, then paused. "You know, Miss Morgan, I truly did think I was being kind that day, saving you from a life of pitying stares and whispered comments, but it seems you prefer to inflict your condition on these good people." Daniel's boot heel scraped the floor as he stepped forward, but Hannah's voice stopped them all. "My condition, Mr. Bennett, is being alive, being strong enough to survive fire and loss and the cruelty of men who judge worth by appearance. My scars tell a story of survival, not shame, and I'd rather bear them proudly among people who see me truly than hide them for a man who sees nothing but himself." Mrs. Peterson had risen, her Virginia steel showing. "I believe you know the way out, Mr. Bennett." When he had gone, Hannah's knees weakened, but Daniel was there, his arms strong around her waist. Sarah pressed close on her other side, and Mrs. Peterson quietly began gathering the teacups, her movements precise and controlled. "Well," the older woman said finally, "I suppose I can burn this properly now." She picked up the torn contract. "Unless you'd like to do the honors, my dear." Hannah looked at the paper that had once held such hope, then such pain. "No," she said softly. "Let the past burn. I choose this present." Daniel's arm tightened slightly around her, and Sarah's head came to rest against her shoulder. Outside, Promise Creek continued its daily rhythm, unaware that in a small parlor, a woman had finally fully claimed her freedom, not in spite of her scars, but because of the strength they represented. The hand-knitted scarf lay wrapped in brown paper on Hannah's bed, Sarah's careful stitches speaking volumes of love and determination. The girl had worked on it in secret for weeks, fingers cramping but never complaining, learning from Mrs. Peterson's patient tutorials, while Hannah was busy with ranch work. Now on Christmas Eve, the finished gift waited to be given, each uneven stitch a testament to Sarah's heart. Snow fell softly outside, turning the prairie into a blanket of white silence. The Crawford ranch house glowed with warmth and lamplight. Pine boughs decorating the mantelpiece, cinnamon and ginger scenting the air from the kitchen where Hannah's cookies cooled on racks. "Ma always said Christmas Eve was magic," Sarah had told her that morning, helping to hang holly sprigs above the doorways. "Like God takes all the love in the world and wraps it up in starlight and snow." Now, as evening settled over the ranch, Hannah stood before Martha's mirror in her room, touching the scars that had once seemed like boundaries between her and the world. The reflection showed something different now. A woman who had found strength in broken places, beauty in imperfection. She had sewn herself a new dress for Christmas, dark green wool that brought out the amber in her unscarred eye. The neckline was higher than current fashion, but she had embroidered it with tiny silver stars, like the ones that would soon fill the Wyoming sky. Her hair, once hidden beneath veils, fell in copper waves past her shoulders. A soft knock at her door made her turn. "Hannah!" Sarah's voice was trembling with excitement. "Pa says it's time to go to the church service. Are you ready?" The church service on Christmas Eve was a tradition in Promise Creek, one Martha Crawford had never missed. Hannah opened her door to find Sarah in her best dress, dark curls tamed into ribboned braids, practically bouncing with anticipation. "You look beautiful," Sarah breathed, taking in Hannah's dress, "like a Christmas angel." "As do you, sweet girl." Hannah smoothed a stray curl from Sarah's forehead. "Shall we go down?" Daniel waited at the foot of the stairs, and Hannah's heart stuttered at the look in his eyes when he saw her. He wore his good suit, the one usually reserved for Sundays, and had trimmed his beard neat and sharp. "Miss Morgan," he said softly, then cleared his throat. "Hannah, you look—" "Pa's trying to say you're prettier than the star on top of the tree," Sarah stage whispered, making them both laugh, breaking the moment's tender tension. They rode to town in the big sleigh, wrapped in blankets against the cold, their breath frosting in the crystal air. Sarah sat between them, chattering about Christmas traditions and speculating about presents, while overhead the stars emerged one by one from the velvet sky. The church windows glowed golden through the snow, and hymns spilled out into the night as they climbed down from the sleigh. Inside, evergreen garlands wound around posts and candles flickered in every window. The whole town seemed to be there, dressed in their finest, faces soft with wonder and fellowship. Mrs. Peterson waved them to a pew near the front, her smile, knowing as she took in Hannah's new dress and the way Daniel's hand rested lightly at the small of her back as they settled into their seats. Sarah snuggled between them, her excitement barely contained. Reverend Mills's service was all about love, coming to earth in humble places, about light shining in darkness, about how God could take the most ordinary things and make them sacred. Hannah felt the words settle deep in her soul, finding echoes in her own journey from darkness to light. When the congregation sang Silent Night, Sarah's clear voice rose sweet and true beside her. On the girl's other side, Daniel's deeper tones joined in, and Hannah found herself harmonizing naturally, their voices weaving together like they had always belonged that way. After the service, they lingered in the churchyard, accepting Christmas wishes from neighbors. Hannah noticed how no one stared at her scars anymore, how genuine warmth filled their greetings. Even Thomas Bennett's supporters had gradually drifted away as autumn turned to winter, his legal threats proving as insubstantial as morning frost. Back at the ranch, Sarah could barely be convinced to change into her nightgown before insisting on her favorite Christmas Eve tradition. "Ma always let me open one present on Christmas Eve," she explained to Hannah, pulling them both to the small tree in the parlor. "Just one special one." Daniel's eyes met Hannah's over their daughter's head, and Hannah's heart caught at that thought. When had she started thinking of Sarah as theirs? "Well then," Hannah said, recovering herself, "I suppose you should open this one." She retrieved the package she'd hidden behind the tree earlier, a leather-bound book of fairy tales ordered, specially from Boston. Sarah's eyes grew huge as she unwrapped it. "Oh, it's beautiful." She traced the gilt letters on the spine. "Will you read some to us, like you do other nights?" "Of course, dear heart." Hannah settled onto the sofa, and Sarah curled against her side like she belonged there. "Wait," Sarah said suddenly. "I have something for you first." She darted to the kitchen and returned with the brown paper package Hannah had glimpsed earlier. Hannah unwrapped it carefully, feeling the love in every uneven stitch of the dark blue scarf. "Sarah, did you make this yourself?" The girl nodded, suddenly shy. "Mrs. Peterson helped. Do you like it? I know it's not perfect, but—" "It's absolutely perfect," Hannah's voice caught as she wrapped the scarf around her neck, "because it was made with love. Just like our family," Sarah said softly, and Hannah felt tears spring to her eyes. Daniel cleared his throat. "I have something for you too, Hannah, if you'll permit me." He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in silver paper. Inside was a delicate silver chain with a single pearl pendant. "It was Martha's," he said quietly. "She always said beautiful things should be worn by beautiful women. I've been waiting for the right moment." Hannah couldn't speak. Daniel's fingers were warm as he fastened the chain around her neck, and she felt the weight of the pearl rest just above her heart. "Perfect," Sarah declared and snuggled close again. "Now read to us?" So Hannah opened the book of fairy tales, its pages fresh and full of promise, and began to read. The fire crackled in the hearth, snow fell softly outside, and in the warm circle of lamplight, three people who had found each other against all odds celebrated their own Christmas miracle, the miracle of becoming family. The pearl rested warm against Hannah's skin, and Sarah's scarf wrapped her in love, and Daniel's presence beside her felt like coming home. Sometimes, she thought, the best gifts couldn't be wrapped. They could only be felt in moments like these, when love turned ordinary evenings into magic and scars into stories of grace. The anonymous, threatening letter trembled in Hannah's hands as she read it for the third time, the January morning light harsh against its scratched words. A scarred woman should know her place. Leave the Crawford Ranch by week's end, or everyone will learn the truth about the Boston fire. Some might say it wasn't an accident at all. She sat at the kitchen table, the breakfast dishes still unwashed, Martha's recipe book open beside her, as if this were any normal morning. But nothing felt normal. The letter had arrived with the weekly mail, hidden between advertisements for seed catalogues and a letter from Sarah's schoolteacher. Daniel was out checking the north pasture fences. Sarah was upstairs working on her arithmetic. The kitchen clock ticked steadily, counting heartbeats of fear she thought she'd left behind in Boston, the truth about the fire. Hannah's hands shook harder. There was truth, yes, but not what the letter writer implied. She'd gone over that night 1,000 times during her recovery. The lamp, the fresh-oiled cleaning rags, the sudden whoosh of flame. If only she'd been more careful, checked the rags before using them to dust the shelves. Hannah, Sarah's voice from the stairs made her quickly fold the letter away. "I'm stuck on this problem about train speeds. Coming, dear heart." Hannah tucked the letter into her pocket, straightened her spine, and went to help with mathematics. But her mind raced beneath her calm exterior. Who had written it? Who else knew about Boston? The answer came that afternoon, riding up the ranch road in a rented buggy from town. Thomas Bennett sat straight-backed in the driver's seat, his city clothes incongruous against the winter landscape. Beside him sat a woman Hannah had never expected to see again, Mrs. Eleanor Wellington, her former fiancé, Charles's mother, her Boston accent carrying across the yard like a whip. "Hannah Morgan," Mrs. Wellington called out as Hannah stepped onto the porch. "Or should I say, the woman who destroyed my son's business prospects." Hannah gripped the porch railing. Charles Wellington's family had owned half the bookshops in Boston, including, she remembered with sudden clarity, the insurance company that had investigated the fire. "Mrs. Wellington," she managed, "this is unexpected." "Not half as unexpected as finding you here," the older woman sniffed, allowing Thomas to help her from the buggy, "playing house with a widower and his impressionable daughter. Does he know what really happened that night in Boston?" "There's nothing to know." But Hannah's voice wavered. The investigation had cleared her of wrongdoing, ruled it a tragic accident, but the Wellingtons had lost money in the settlement, and Eleanor Wellington had never forgiven her for ruining Charles's reputation when he broke their engagement. "No." Thomas Bennett's smooth voice carried false concern. "Then you won't mind if we speak with Mr. Crawford about certain irregularities in the insurance investigation? About witnesses who saw someone deliberately soaking rags in oil that day?" Hannah's world tilted. "What witnesses? There were no witnesses because there was nothing to witness." "Money speaks louder than truth, my dear." Mrs. Wellington smiled thinly. Especially when one has enough of it to convince people to remember things differently. The screen door creaked behind Hannah. Sarah stood there, her face pale. "Hannah, what's happening?" "Sarah, go back inside." Hannah tried to keep her voice steady. "Please." "Yes, child." Mrs. Wellington's voice dripped false sweetness. "Run along while we discuss adult matters, though you might want to pack your things. I doubt your father will want a suspected arsonist living under his roof." "That's enough." Daniel's voice cut through the winter air like a blade. He strode from the barn, his face dark with anger. "Sarah, go to your room." For once, Sarah didn't argue. She fled inside, but Hannah could feel her watching through the upstairs window. "Crawford." Thomas Bennett stepped forward, all smooth business. "We've come to discuss Miss Morgan's history in Boston and her current living arrangement here." "Have you?" Daniel mounted the porch steps to stand beside Hannah. The heat of his body against her shoulder steadied her, trembling. "And what gives you the right to discuss either?" Mrs. Wellington drew herself up. "My family lost considerable investments in that fire. The insurance settlement was generous due to certain overlooked evidence. Evidence that could come to light unless what?" Hannah's voice found its strength. "Unless I leave. Unless I give up my home, my family, my life here." "Family?" Mrs. Wellington laughed. "My dear, you're an employee, though perhaps you've convinced yourself otherwise. Just as you convinced yourself my son would actually marry a bookkeeper's daughter, even before the fire marked you. That's what this is really about, isn't it?" Understanding dawned cold and clear in Hannah's mind. "Not the fire at all. You. Never thought I was good enough for Charles. And now you can't stand that I've found happiness without your approval." "Happiness?" Thomas Bennett's voice was silk over steel. "A scarred woman living in sin with a widower? Think of the scandal. Think of what it would do to young Sarah's prospects." Daniel's hand found Hannah's, his fingers warm and strong. "Sin?" His quiet voice carried dangerous undertones. "The only sin I see here is using lies and threats to hurt an innocent woman. Now get off my property." "Innocent?" Mrs. Wellington pulled a document from her reticule. "This sworn statement says otherwise. Signed by 3 witnesses who remember seeing Hannah Morgan deliberately preparing for arson that day. One signature to a judge, and your reputation won't be the only thing that burns." Hannah felt the world spin. 3 signatures. 3 lies, but who would believe her over them? What judge would take her word against wealthy Boston citizens? Then she felt it, the crinkle of paper in her pocket, the anonymous letter. She pulled it out with shaking fingers, unfolded it in the winter sunlight. "Your handwriting was always distinctive, Mrs. Wellington, even disguised." She held up the letter. "Threatening letters are illegal in Wyoming territory, as is attempted extortion." Mrs. Wellington's face went pale. Thomas Bennett stepped back, his smooth facade cracking. "You didn't think I'd keep evidence, did you?" Hannah's voice grew stronger. "The insurance investigator's original report, the doctor's statements about my injuries being consistent with trying to save books, not start a fire. All safely stored with my lawyer in Boston. I didn't want to remember that night, but I'm not fool enough to leave myself unprotected." She was lying. There were no stored documents, but 20 years of dealing with Boston's finest had taught her how to bluff with the best of them. And she saw in Mrs. Wellington's face that the older woman couldn't be sure. "You're lying," Thomas Bennett said, but uncertainty tinged his voice. "Test me." Hannah straightened her spine. "Take your false witnesses to court. Watch me produce every document, every statement, every piece of evidence that proves who really tried to destroy a reputation that day. I wonder how Charles would react to learning his mother's role in all this." Mrs. Wellington's face went from pale to mottled red. "You wouldn't dare. Try me." Hannah felt Daniel's quiet strength beside her, felt Sarah's presence watching from above, felt the solid truth of her innocence holding her up. "I'm not that frightened girl anymore. I know who I am. I know where I belong. And I will fight with everything I have to protect this family. The silence stretched tight as a fiddle string. Then Mrs. Wellington turned on her heel, nearly running to the buggy. Thomas Bennet stood a moment longer, measuring the steel in Hannah's eyes, the solid presence of Daniel beside her. "You've made a mistake," he said finally, but his voice held more resignation than threat. "No," Hannah replied softly. "For the first time in my life, I've made exactly the right choice." They watched the buggy disappear down the ranch road. Only when it was out of sight did Hannah's knees give way. But Daniel's arms were there to catch her, to hold her close, as tears of relief and lingering fear soaked his shirt. "I've got you," he whispered into her hair. "I've got you, and I'm never letting go." Above them, the screen door creaked again. Sarah flew down the porch steps and wrapped her arms around them both. They stood there in the winter sunlight, holding each other, their shadows merging into one on the weathered porch boards. Family, Hannah thought, not by blood or law or pristine reputations, but by choice, by love, by the strength to stand together against any storm. And that, she knew now, was the greatest truth of all. The draft of Hannah's story lay before her on the kitchen table, ink still drying on the careful pages. She'd worked on it through the quiet hours of early morning, writing and rewriting until each word rang true. The Promise Creek Weekly News had never published a personal account before. Mostly it ran announcements, cattle prices, and the occasional recipe. But editor Jim Taylor had approached her after church last Sunday. "Folk should hear your story, Miss Morgan," he'd said, twisting his printer's cap in ink-stained hands. "Might help others, might help heal some hurts we can't see." Now reading over her words one last time, Hannah touched the pearl at her throat, Martha's pearl, Daniel's gift, her anchor. The story began simply. "I came to Promise Creek wearing a veil, hiding scars that told a story of survival. I thought I was running from shame, but instead I found a truth, that beauty isn't in perfection, but in the courage to show our whole selves to the world." "Is that your article for the paper?" Sarah's voice startled her. The girl stood in the doorway, hair still mussed from sleep, Daniel behind her with quiet support in his eyes. "Yes," Hannah said softly, "though I'm not sure." "Read it to us." Sarah settled into her usual chair, the one that had become hers, just as surely as Hannah had become part of their family. Daniel poured coffee, brought Hannah a cup, sat close, enough that his knee touched hers under the table. So Hannah read her story aloud, her voice growing stronger with each word. She wrote of the Boston fire, not just the tragedy, but the courage of the firefighters who'd saved her. She wrote of her father's unwavering love, of Dr. Warner's gentle hands during her recovery. She wrote of coming west, of Thomas Bennet's rejection, of finding unexpected welcome in a widow's boarding house and healing on a ranch where scars didn't matter. When she finished, Sarah's eyes shone with tears and pride. "It's perfect," she declared. "Everyone should read it." Daniel's hand found hers on the table. "Are you sure about this? You don't owe anyone your story." "I know." Hannah squeezed his fingers. "But maybe my story isn't just mine anymore. Maybe it belongs to everyone who's ever felt marked by life, everyone who needs to know there's hope beyond the hurting." The Promise Creek Weekly News came out on Wednesday. Hannah stood in the general store, heart pounding, as Mrs. Miller read it aloud to a group of women by the fabric counter. She watched faces change, saw hands rise unconsciously to touch hidden hurts. The widow Johnson's wedding ring, young Betty Wilson's limping leg from a childhood accident. "Well," Mrs. Miller said finally, her voice rough with emotion, "I always did say there was more to beauty than meets the eye." By afternoon, something had shifted in Promise Creek. Women stopped Hannah on the street, sharing their own stories of survival. Old Jack Peters rolled up his sleeve to show her the burn scars from a ranch fire 30 years back. "Carried them proud ever since," he said. "Marks of a life lived brave." But it was Mrs. Peterson who brought Hannah to tears, arriving at the ranch with a package wrapped in faded silk. "My grandmother's wedding veil," she said, pressing it into Hannah's hands. I've been saving it. Thought you might want it when the time comes. Hannah caught her breath at the delicate lace, at the love in the offering. But my scars will be beautiful with it, Mrs. Peterson finished firmly, because they're part of who you are. And who you are, my dear, is a gift to this town. That evening, Hannah sat on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the prairie. In shades of gold and rose, Sarah was inside practicing her piano lessons, the slightly off-key notes floating through the open windows like a familiar lullaby. Daniel's boots sounded on the steps, and then he was beside her, solid and real. And, "Hers! You've started quite a stir in town," he said, smiling. "Jim Taylor says he's never had so many people asking for extra copies of the paper." Hannah leaned against his shoulder, feeling the rhythm of his breathing. "I never thought my story could help others find their courage." "You've been helping people find their courage since the day you stepped off that train," Daniel said softly. "You just didn't know it then." The sunset deepened to purple, the first stars pricking through the darkening sky. Inside, Sarah switched from scales to a hymn, her young voice joining the piano's uneven notes. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. Hannah closed her eyes, feeling the truth of it all settle into her bones. Sometimes the greatest stories weren't in books at all, but in the lives of ordinary people who refused to let pain have the final word. Sometimes healing came not in hiding our scars, but in letting them shine like maps leading others home. The seed packets lay spread across the kitchen table like a promise of things to come. Tomatoes and peas, marigolds and sweet peas, herbs that Martha had once grown in the kitchen garden now gone wild. Hannah ran her fingers over their colourful papers while morning sun streamed through windows she'd washed clean of winter's dust. "Mutta always said spring's when everything realizes it can begin again," Sarah said, sorting the packets into neat rows. "Like how the prairie turns green even after the hardest winter." Hannah smiled, touching the empty space where her garden would soon grow. After her story had appeared in the newspaper, Daniel had quietly begun expanding the kitchen garden plot, adding new fence posts, rich soil from the creek bottom. Yesterday, he'd presented her with these seed packets, his eyes warm with unspoken meaning. "Your mother was wise about many things," Hannah replied, watching Sarah's clever fingers arrange the packets by planting thyme. The girl had grown over the winter, her dresses showing ankle now, her face losing some of its childhood roundness, but her heart remained as open as ever. "She would have liked this," Sarah said suddenly. "You and Pa planning a garden together. You making our house feel like home again." She looked up, her dark eyes serious. "When are you going to marry him?" Hannah's hands stilled on the seed packets. "Sarah, I know he wants to ask you. I've seen him practicing his words when he thinks no one's watching." Sarah's face held all the earnest wisdom of 13 years. "And I know you love us. You don't have to say it. It shows in everything you do." Through the open window, Hannah could hear Daniel in the barn, his deep voice humming an old hymn as he worked. The sound wrapped around her heart like a familiar embrace. "Your father hasn't asked me anything yet," she said carefully. "But you'll say yes when he does." Sarah pressed. "Because we're already a family, we just need to make it official." Hannah drew the girl close, breathing in the scent of sunshine and fresh-washed hair. "When did you get so wise? Must be all those books you read to me." Sarah grinned against her shoulder. "Speaking of which, Pa's birthday is next month. I thought maybe we could plant his favorite flowers as a surprise, the ones Ma used to grow by the front porch. What were they called?" "Delphiniums," Hannah said, remembering the pressed flowers in Martha's prayer book. Tall, blue ones that looked like summer sky. They spent the morning planning their garden, mapping out rows and plots on a piece of paper that somehow turned into a future. Spring vegetables giving way to summer flowers, autumn squash storing for winter soups, years stretching ahead filled with growing things and family meals, and love taking root in fertile soil. Daniel found them there at noon, their heads bent over seed catalogues and garden plans. He brought the scent of horses and spring wind with him, and something else, a lightness Hannah hadn't seen before. Starting a farm within a ranch? He teased, but his eyes were soft as he studied their plans. Hannah's teaching me about companion planting, Sarah announced. Like how marigolds protect tomatoes from bugs and how peas make the soil better for everything else. She gave her father a meaningful look that made Hannah hide a smile. Companion planting, Daniel's hand found Hannah's shoulder, warm and sure. Sounds like good wisdom, things growing better together than apart. The touch of his hand sent warmth spreading through Hannah's chest. Outside, meadowlarks called from the fence posts, and new grass rippled in the spring breeze. Everything felt possible, as if the whole world had paused on the edge of becoming. I was thinking, Daniel said carefully, his hand still steady on her shoulder, that maybe we could add a grape arbor too, for shade in summer and maybe for a wedding someday. Hannah's heart stumbled, then steadied. She covered his hand with hers, feeling the strength in his work-roughened fingers, the gentleness in their touch. Someday soon, she asked softly. His smile was brighter than spring sunshine. As soon as you'd like. Sarah's squeal of delight startled the cats from their sunny windowsill. She threw her arms around them both, seed packets scattering like confetti. Across the table, Hannah laughed, joy bubbling up pure and clear as spring water. Here was her garden, her home, her family, growing together, taking root, reaching for the light. Some seeds, she thought, needed winter's hardship before they could bloom. But oh, how sweet the flowering when spring finally came. The property deed lay on Judge Wilson's desk, its yellowed edges crisp with age. Hannah could read the careful script even from where she sat. Crawford Ranch, hereby granted to James Crawford and his heirs. Daniel's grandfather's name, written in ink that had faded but endured, just like the family's claim to this land. The judge's chambers seemed too small for this moment. Thomas Bennett sat across the room, his Eastern suit out of place against the rough-hewn walls. His lawyer, brought in from Cheyenne, shuffled papers with manufactured importance. The matter is quite simple, Bennett's lawyer was saying. My client's marriage contract with Miss Morgan predates any arrangement she has with Mr. Crawford. As her legal husband-to-be at the time, he has certain property rights. Objection. Daniel's lawyer, old Sam Murphy, who'd served Promise Creek for 30 years, didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. No marriage ever took place. Mr. Bennett publicly rejected the contract when he abandoned Miss Morgan at the train station. Judge Wilson, his face weathered as prairie rock, studied the documents before him. Hannah felt Daniel's solid presence beside her, heard Sarah shifting restlessly in her chair by the window. The girl had insisted on coming, declaring that family stood together. Mr. Bennett, the judge said finally, your claim rests on a contract that you yourself broke. You claim property rights through a marriage that never occurred, to a woman you publicly spurned. He lifted his eyes, sharp as winter wind. Did you think Wyoming territory so backward that our laws would support such nonsense? Bennett's smooth facade cracked slightly. The contract was voided the moment you walked away. Judge Wilson's voice held the weight of mountains. But even if it weren't, you've overlooked something vital. He lifted the property deed. This land has belonged to the Crawfords for 3 generations. The original grant specifies James Crawford and his heirs. Not his business partners, not his creditors, and certainly not the rejected suitor of a woman who works on his grandson's ranch. Your Honor, Bennett's lawyer tried, my client only wishes to protect his interests. His interests. Sam Murphy's laugh was dry as autumn grass. His only interest is trying to steal a prosperous ranch through legal trickery. And I remind the court that attempting to claim property rights through a fraudulent marriage contract is a serious offense in this territory. Hannah watched the blood drain from Bennett's face. The threat of fraud charges, that would tarnish his Eastern business reputation far more than a failed claim to ranch land. Furthermore, Sam continued, pulling out another document. "I have here a letter from the Boston Police Department confirming that Mr. Bennett and Mrs. Eleanor Wellington are under investigation for attempted extortion and conspiracy to present false witnesses in the matter of the bookshop fire." Hannah's heart jumped. She hadn't known about this, hadn't known Daniel and Sam had written to Boston, had pursued justice on her behalf while she was busy planning gardens and futures. Judge Wilson's eyebrows rose. "Extortion, Mr. Bennett? That's a serious charge. Bennett looked suddenly smaller, his city polish cracking like varnish in summer heat. "I was merely trying to protect—" "You were trying to steal what was never yours." Daniel's quiet voice carried authority earned through years of honest work. "The ranch, Hannah's reputation, her chance at happiness, none of it belonged to you. None of it ever will." Sarah stood up then, straight and proud as her mother's daughter. "Hannah belongs with us. We're her family." "Family," Judge Wilson mused, looking at the three of them. Daniel strong and steady, Sarah fierce in her loyalty, Hannah with her scars caught in morning light. "Yes, I believe you are." He squared the papers on his desk. "The court finds no merit in Mr. Bennett's claim. The property rights to Crawford Ranch remain solely with the Crawford family. Furthermore," he fixed Bennett with a stern eye, "any further attempts to harass Miss Morgan or the Crawfords will result in criminal charges. Do I make myself clear?" Bennett's lawyer gathered their papers with shaking hands. Bennett himself seemed to have aged years in minutes, his schemes crumbling like sandcastles in rain. "Your Honor," he began, but Judge Wilson cut him off. "I suggest you catch the next train east, Mr. Bennett. Wyoming territory doesn't look kindly on men who try to build fortune on others' pain." After they had gone, Hannah stood at the courthouse window, watching Bennett's defeated figure hurry toward the hotel. Daniel's arms slipped around her waist, and Sarah's hand found hers. "It's really over," Hannah whispered. "It's really beginning," Daniel corrected gently, and in his voice she heard all their tomorrows, garden arbors and wedding vows, summer, storms weathered together, love growing strong as prairie grass after rain. The property deed went back to its place in the Crawford family Bible, carrying not just a legal claim to land, but the story of how love and truth had protected what mattered most. Not acres or buildings, but the heart's own territory, where family bloomed like wildflowers after fire, turning scars into strength and endings into beginnings. The simple gold ring caught the last rays of sunset, its inner surface bearing 3 words newly engraved: "Beautiful always, 1875. Daniel held it in his pocket as he watched Hannah in the garden, her copper hair aflame in the evening light, as she showed Sarah how to stake the climbing roses that had begun to bloom again after years of neglect. Martha's roses. But somehow they seemed to bloom brighter this year, as if appreciating the gentle hands that tended them. Hannah had scattered wildflower seeds among them too, creating a tapestry of color that brought the random beauty of the prairie right up to their doorstep. "Perfect timing," Sarah whispered, passing him with an armful of garden twine. She'd been his conscious conspirator these past weeks, helping him plan this moment. Now she gave him a meaningful look and called out, "Hannah, I just remembered. I promised Mrs. Peterson I'd help her with her quilting this evening. Pa can help you finish with the roses." Hannah laughed, seeing through the transparent excuse but playing along. "Well, if you're sure you'd rather piece quilting squares than garden—" "Absolutely." Sarah was already halfway to the barn where their neighbor's daughter waited with a wagon. "Don't wait up!" Daniel stepped into the garden, his heart drumming against the ring in his pocket. The evening air was sweet with roses and wild sage, with the lingering warmth of a day well spent. Hannah turned to him, her face glowing with the particular joy that gardening always brought her. "She's about as subtle as a bull in a china shop," Hannah said fondly, watching Sarah's retreat. "Gets that from her father," Daniel admitted, taking the garden twine from her hands. Their fingers touched, and the simple contact still sent warmth through his whole body. Though I suppose that means you know exactly what I'm about to do. Hannah's smile held both nervousness and hope. I might have some idea. Daniel touched one of the roses, its petals silk soft against his weathered fingers. Martha planted these roses the year we were married, said a home needs growing things to make it truly live. He looked at Hannah, seeing how the setting sun turned her scars to silver, how her eyes held both strength and tenderness. They nearly died the year we lost her. Wouldn't bloom, wouldn't thrive, no matter what I did. Like the house itself was grieving. Hannah's hand found his, squeezed gently. Daniel, but then you came, he continued, his voice rough with emotion. With your quiet courage and your way of seeing beauty in broken things, you brought life back to the roses, to the house, to Sarah, to me. He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. I never expected to love again. Didn't think my heart had it in it. But you taught me that love isn't something that runs dry. It's like your garden. Plant it in good soil, tend it with care, and it grows stronger with each season. Tears sparked in Hannah's eyes, but her smile was radiant as sunrise. Daniel released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, drawing out the ring. I'm not offering you a perfect life, he said softly, just an honest one. Days of hard work and simple joys, nights of quiet talk and peaceful sleep. A family that sees you for exactly who you are and loves you not, in spite of your scars, but because they're part of what made you this amazing woman standing before me. Hannah's free hand rose to touch the pearl at her throat, Martha's pearl. His first gift to her. Now he offered her this ring, this promise, this future. The engraving, he continued, showing her the words inside the band. Because you are beautiful always, in every way that matters. So I'm asking Hannah Morgan if you'll marry me. Be Sarah's mother in truth as you already are in heart. Be my wife, my partner, my love for whatever years God grants us. Hannah's tears spilled over, but her voice was steady as prairie bedrock when she answered, Yes, oh Daniel, yes. The ring slipped onto her finger as naturally as if it had waited all along for this moment. When he kissed her, she tasted of sunshine and roses and the sweet certainty of coming home. A delighted squeal broke them apart. Sarah stood at the garden gate, having clearly never left for Mrs. Peterson's at all. Finally, she cried, running to embrace them both. Now we can tell everyone. Hannah laughed through her tears, holding them both close. Above them, the first stars pricked through the darkening sky, and the roses released their evening perfume into the air. Daniel felt the rightness of it all settle into his bones. His daughter's joy, Hannah's love, the promise of all their tomorrows stretching out before them like the endless prairie horizon. Here in this garden, where love had bloomed twice, where hope had taken root in soil enriched by both joy and sorrow, their family was growing into something new and beautiful. Something, Daniel thought, that would flower for generations to come. The wedding dress pattern lay on Mrs. Peterson's dining room table, its tissue paper pieces carefully modified to accommodate Hannah's wishes. The original high collar had been redrawn to a gentle scoop, and the sleeves would now end just below her elbows. For the first time in her life, Hannah was designing a dress that wouldn't hide her scars. It's perfect, Mrs. Peterson said, running her fingers along the altered neckline. Simple, elegant, like you, my dear. She glanced at the grandmother's veil, carefully aired and pressed, waiting on its tissue paper bed. The lace will fall just so, framing your face without hiding it. Hannah touched the pattern pieces, remembering all the high-necked dresses she'd made since the fire, each one a fortress of fabric. I never thought I'd wear anything but high collars again. Never thought I'd want to. And now, Mrs. Peterson's wise eyes studied her face. Now, Hannah smiled, touching her engagement ring. Now I understand what Daniel meant by beautiful always. It's not about hiding or pretending. It's about being fully yourself, scars and all. Sarah looked up from where she sat cross-legged on the floor, sorting through fabric samples. Like how the prairie's most beautiful in autumn, when everything's golden and a little bit broken. That's what Pa says. Your father, Mrs. Peterson said, threading her needle, is a wiser man than most. The dress took shape over the next weeks, each stitch sewn with love and purpose. The cream-colored silk had been ordered from Denver, but the lace at the cuffs came from Martha's wedding dress, offered by Daniel with quiet understanding. She'd want you to have it, he'd said. You're giving Sarah a mother again. Seems right her mother should be part of that giving. The whole town became involved in the wedding preparations. Women brought recipes for the celebration feast, each one copied carefully into Hannah's kitchen notebook. Men offered to build extra tables for the garden reception. Even old Jack Peters contributed, crafting a set of sterling silver candlesticks. In his silversmith's shop, every bride needs something that shines, he'd said gruffly, presenting them wrapped in soft flannel. But it was the dress that marked Hannah's transformation most visibly. At the final fitting, standing in Mrs. Peterson's parlor, while Sarah and half a dozen women made tiny adjustments, Hannah caught her reflection in the full-length mirror and barely recognized herself. The silk fell in clean lines from shoulders. To feet, the scooped neckline elegant and unflinching. Her scars were visible, the silver-pink tracks that traced down her neck and left shoulder. But somehow they seemed to belong now, like the natural variations in the silk's weave, like the subtle patterns in Martha's antique lace. "Oh, Hannah," Sarah breathed, coming to stand beside her. "You look like a queen." Mrs. Peterson smoothed the skirt with practiced hands. "She looks like herself," she corrected gently, "which is far better than any queen." Hannah touched the pearl. At her throat, her something old that would complement her grandmother's veil. Daniel's ring caught the light on her finger, and Martha's lace kissed her skin with the softness of blessing. "I used to dream about my wedding day," she said, softly. "Before the fire, I'd imagined every detail, down to the last ribbon. But this—" She gestured to her reflection, to the women surrounding her with love and support, to Sarah's shining eyes. "This is better than any dream, because it's real. All of it, the scars, the love, the family we're building. It's perfectly imperfect. Like your garden," Sarah said wisely, "where the wildflowers grow right next to the roses, and everything's more beautiful together than it would be apart." The women laughed softly at the girl's perception, but Hannah saw Mrs. Peterson dash away a tear. They all knew what this wedding meant. Not just the union of two people, but the healing of old wounds, the triumph of love over fear, the building of family from the ashes of loss. Later, after the dress was carefully stored away, and the other women had gone, Hannah sat with Mrs. Peterson on her porch, watching the sunset paint Promise Creek in shades of gold and rose. "I never thanked you properly," Hannah said, "for that first night, for taking in a stranger with a veil and a broken heart." Mrs. Peterson's worn hands found hers, squeezed gently. "You thanked me every day after, dear one. Every time you chose to stay, to grow, to love. Every time you helped another soul feel less alone in their scars." She smiled, wise and tender. "That's what marriage is, you know. Not just the ceremony or the dress. It's choosing each other every day, scars and all, and building something beautiful from whatever life gives you." Hannah touched her modified neckline, feeling the freedom in its open design. In 2 weeks, she would walk down the church aisle in this dress, head held high, scars uncovered, heart full of love, and every step would be a testament to the truth. She had finally embraced that real beauty lies not in perfection, but in the courage to be fully, unabashedly yourself. The silver hand mirror was Daniel's last gift before their wedding separation. A delicate thing with roses carved into its handle, and 2 words etched on the back, "See True." He'd given it to her that morning before leaving for the north pasture, where tradition dictated he'd spend his last night as a bachelor. "It was my mother's," he'd said softly. "She gave it to Martha the night before our wedding. Said every bride should see herself clearly before saying her vows." His eyes had held such tenderness. "Your turn now." Hannah sat at Martha's vanity in what had become her room, the mirror reflecting lamplight and shadow across her features. The house felt strange with Daniel away, but Sarah's presence down the hall and Mrs. Peterson's quiet movements in the guest room brought comfort to the night-hushed rooms. For 2 years after the fire, she'd avoided mirrors, turning them to walls, draping them in cloth, seeing only what she needed to in quick, furtive glances. But now she held Daniel's gift steady, studying the face that looked back at her. The scars traced their familiar pattern down her left side, silver pink in the lamplight. But she saw other things too, things she'd been too afraid to see before. The strength in her jaw, the warmth in her eyes, the gentle curve of her smile that even the scars couldn't distort. She saw the woman who had walked through fire and emerged not just surviving, but blazing with her own inner light. A soft knock at the door broke her reverie. "Hannah," Sarah's voice. "Can I come in?" "Of course, dear heart." Sarah slipped in, wearing her nightgown, her dark hair in its sleeping braid. She carried something wrapped in faded calico. "I found this in Ma's trunk. Pa said I could give it to you." Hannah set down the hand mirror and accepted the package. Inside lay a journal bound in worn leather, its pages filled with Martha's flowing script. The last entry was dated just days before her death. "I never read it," Sarah said quickly. "But Pa said, he said Ma would want you to have it. To know you're not replacing her, just continuing what she began. Building family, making love grow." Hannah's fingers trembled as she opened to a random page. Martha's words leaped out. "Love isn't a finite thing to be spent and gone. It's like the prairie grass. It can burn to ash, but the roots run deep, waiting for rain to grow again. Daniel knows how to love like that. Steady, patient, true. Whoever comes after me, if anyone does, I hope they understand what a gift that is." Tears blurred Hannah's vision. She pulled Sarah close, breathing in the scent of youth and promise. "Your mother was very wise. She also said I was stubborn. As a mule and twice as loud," Sarah said with a watery laugh. "In the good parts of the journal, the parts where I was little." Hannah smiled, touching the journal's worn cover. "Would you like to read some of those parts together?" They settled. On the bed, Sarah curled against her side like she belonged there, which Hannah supposed she did. Together they read Martha's accounts of Sarah's first steps, first words, first time riding a horse. They laughed at tales of toddler mischief and smiled at a mother's proud observations. "She would have loved you," Sarah said suddenly. "Because you love us the way she did. Not perfect, but true." Hannah reached for the silver hand mirror again, holding it so they both could see their reflection. Sarah's dark head next to her copper one, the girl's unlined face beside her scarred one, different on the surface, but wearing the same expression of love. "What do you see?" Hannah asked softly. Sarah studied their reflection. "Family," she said simply. "Just family." A floorboard creaked, and they looked up to find Mrs. Peterson in the doorway, her face soft with understanding. "I thought you might want help setting your hair for tomorrow," she said, coming to sit behind them. "Though it seems you're already well occupied with more important things." Hannah handed her the mirror. "What do you see?" The older woman took her time answering, looking from the reflection to the journal to Sarah's earnest face. "I see healing," she said finally. "I see love making something new from what was broken. I see 3 generations of women, Martha in her journal, you two here now, and all the daughters yet to come, bound together by something stronger than blood or time." She began unbraiding Hannah's copper hair, her fingers gentle as blessing. Sarah leaned against Hannah's shoulder, and together they sat in the lamplit room, surrounded by Martha's words, Daniel's gift, and the quiet miracle of becoming family. Hannah looked once more in the silver mirror, seeing past surface to substance, past scars to soul. Tomorrow she would make her vows before God and community, but the deeper truth was written here, in Martha's journal, in Sarah's trust, in her own. Heart finally whole enough to reflect love's light back into the world. The marriage certificate waited on Reverend Mills's desk, its official lines empty, ready to record this moment in Promise Creek's history. But what made it truly special was the crowd of signatures already filling the witness lines. Nearly every adult in town had insisted on signing, turning the document into something more than legal proof. It was a testament to community, to acceptance, to love's power to heal not just two people, but an entire town. Hannah stood in the church vestibule, her heart beating steady and sure beneath cream silk and antique lace. The modified neckline of her dress left her scars visible, but the grandmother's veil softened them like morning mist on prairie hills. Sarah, radiant in blue organdy, made last-minute adjustments to the veil's fall. "Perfect," the girl declared, then suddenly threw her arms around Hannah's waist. "I love you, Ma." The name, spoken for the first time, brought tears to Hannah's eyes. "I love you too, sweet girl." Mrs. Peterson appeared, dabbing her own eyes. "It's time. Are you ready?" Hannah touched the pearl at her throat, felt the weight of Martha's journal wisdom in her heart. "I've been ready since the moment I chose to stay." The church doors opened to late spring sunshine, and the sight that nearly stopped Hannah's breath, every pew filled with familiar faces, wildflowers and Martha's roses decorating every surface, and at the altar, Daniel turning to see her. His face, when their eyes met, held such joy that Hannah felt her own heart might burst with it. She had expected to feel nervous, walking down the aisle with every eye upon her uncovered scars. Instead, she felt only peace. These people had seen her true self already, had watched her bloom like Sarah's garden flowers. Their gazes held only love and celebration. Old Jack Peters had polished his silver candlesticks until they gleamed like stars. Mrs. Miller had sewn tiny rosebuds onto the altar cloth. Even Thomas Bennett's former supporters had contributed to the celebration. Their earlier judgment transformed into genuine welcome. Sarah preceded her down the aisle, scattering rose petals from Martha's bushes. Then Hannah walked forward on her own, head high, heart sure. No one gave her away because she had given herself to this man, this family, this life she had chosen. Daniel's hands were warm and strong when they clasped hers. His eyes held memories of all that had brought them here. A veiled woman at the edge of church, gentle hours with horses, storms weathered together, garden plots mapped out like future promises. Reverend Mills spoke of love's healing power, of family forged by choice as much as blood, of beauty that ran soul deep. But Hannah heard deeper echoes too. Martha's words from the journal, Sarah's wisdom about broken things being beautiful, Mrs. Peterson's quiet certainty that love could bloom again after loss. "The rings," Reverend Mills prompted, and Sarah stepped forward with the simple gold bands they had chosen. Daniel's voice was rough with emotion as he spoke his vows. "Hannah Morgan, I choose you as you are, strong and scarred and beautiful. I offer you my heart's deep fields, my home's warm shelter, my life's full measure. Where you walk, I walk beside you. What you build, I help create. Your scars are sacred to me because they brought you here, to this moment, to our family's heart." Hannah's own vows rose from depths of certainty she had never known before. "Daniel Crawford, I choose you as you are, gentle and steadfast and true. I bring you my whole self, marked by fire but made stronger for it. I offer you my future's hope, my present's joy, my past's hard-won wisdom. Where you stand, I stand beside you. What you love, I help protect. Your daughter is my daughter. Your home my home. Your love my journey's end and beginning." Sarah handed them the rings, her face shining. As they exchanged the bands, Hannah noticed what hadn't been visible before, tiny roses engraved around each circle, like the ones blooming in their garden, like the ones carved on her silver mirror, like the ones Martha had planted with such hope. "What God and love have joined," Reverend Mills proclaimed, "let no one tear asunder." The kiss they shared tasted of joy and promise, of spring roses and prairie wind. Sarah's arms wrapped around them both, and then the whole church seemed to embrace them in celebration. The marriage certificate received its final signatures: Daniel's strong hand, Hannah's flowing script, Sarah's careful letters, and all the witnesses who had watched love grow from ashes into beauty. But the real proof of their union wasn't in ink and paper. It was in the way they held each other, in Sarah's radiant face, in the community's shared joy, in the future stretching before them bright as prairie sunrise. They were bound now by law and love, by choice and chance, by scars transformed into strength. They were family, not just Hannah, Daniel, and Sarah, but all of Promise Creek, all who had witnessed love's power to heal and rebuild, to make beauty from brokenness, to write new stories on Hearts Ready to Bloom Again. The family portrait hung in the Crawford Ranch house parlor, catching morning light through windows Sarah had polished until they shone. In the photograph taken on their first anniversary, Hannah stood unveiled and smiling, her scars catching light like silver threads in silk. Daniel's arm wrapped strong around her waist, his face holding the quiet joy of a man who had found life's deepest treasures. Sarah stood before them, her height now reaching Hannah's shoulder, her dark curls and laughing eyes so like her first mother's, her smile pure sunshine. Beneath the portrait, Hannah's garden flourished, Martha's roses now intertwined with wild prairie flowers, traditional beds mingling with native plants, everything growing stronger together. Just like their family, this morning, like every morning, they gathered at the kitchen table, Daniel reading from Martha's prayer book, Sarah planning her day's lessons. She'd decided to become a teacher, like her ma. Hannah serving breakfast on Martha's blue china plates. Through the open window came the scent of roses and sage, the sound of dawn wind in prairie grass. Hannah touched the pearl at her throat, then the scars that she no longer thought of as barriers. They were simply part of her story now. A story of fire and healing, of loss and finding, of love strong enough to build beauty from ashes. Daniel caught her eye across the table and smiled, the same smile that had first welcomed her on a church porch 2 years ago. Sarah hummed as she braided her hair, the tune one of Martha's old hymns about grace and second chances. This was their masterpiece, not the portrait on the wall, but the living, breathing family they'd built together, imperfect, beautiful, and completely their own.